Welcome to the video podcast, Parenting Your Child in Recovery. My name is Richard Jones, RN. Today, I want to do something a little different. I thought about a throwback. I said, let me go back and see what some of the old podcasts were. So I went back to the very first one, which was on September the 14th, 2020, right? Wow, that's a long time. Uh, but I wanted to go back because it was an interesting subject. My first subject was the 5 things that I wanted to let people know about this podcast. So the very first thing I noticed about the podcast was a couple of things. First of all, there was no description. I'm not quite sure. Not that my descriptions are very good now, but I had no description in the video. In the podcast. So, and of course, they weren't video back then. But um, my energy a little low, but it never was very high as far as that goes. And actually, it sounded better than I thought it did because most of the podcasts that I've done, I don't listen to. I usually don't overcorrect them. I may take out some large gaps, but most of the time I just, kind of let them wing. So not a lot of that either. But one of the things I noticed was I gave a shout out to Crystal Profit. She is a podcaster. She teaches people how to podcast back then. And that's what I took my first podcast course back then. And it was good. I didn't really go too much into a lot of the podcast education per se, because I never was really interested in building a, podcast brand per se. But she did say, try to be clear, which I tried to do. It's kind of hard when you're making a podcast and you don't really know how to format. Try to provide value, which I tried to do, and try to be passionate about your subject, which I was, and I still am. So, let's talk about that video. The 5 things I wanted people to know about the video. Well, the first thing I wanted to do was tell them, who the video is for. And I started off with basically, and my main goal was at the time, and it still is, but I don't say it as much. I thought that this situation we were in, trying to help young adults and the families, and their families, is that we were a team. I talked a lot about team building, and I talked about the team in terms of the individual we were working with. I talked about team as far as the support group and the people that are helped, the real people assets to the thing. And I also talked about the helping professionals, as I used to say more often than the people who were involved, medical people, social people, anybody who was involved on the outside giving information in. And I thought that we could be a better team. My whole point for all this was to try to build a better, more responsive team. So a lot of times that's what I talked about. And I talked a lot about compliance, because at that time I was really enthusiastic about getting other helping professionals to work together. I've not abandoned that theory, but I don't push it as much now, because I found out that in this online space, and anybody that I'm talking to in this genre, not so much face-to-face, but face-to-face also, most people are very wary of someone trying to take their action, and they want to justify their positions. And this whole thing I did with Second Starts was to actually do the opposite, trying not to justify our positions, but trying to meld together and build a stronger unit to help in this compliance with these young people. So I don't talk about that as much now. Maybe I should get back into it. So, but I talked a lot about the chronic recidivism, because at that time I, had been too long off of leaving out of the jail for a couple of years. And I was really in that mindset. So I was saying a lot about that, but I was about a lot of compliance, and I talked about one of my favorite subjects at the time, detrimental procrastination. And I always thought that it was the things that the young people and the medical practitioners and the support group weren't doing. I didn't think that there was so much changes that needed to be made, although there are some, but I thought it was more of what we weren't doing and process we weren't putting into place. So I harped a lot on that at that time. I wanted to talk about, and at that time I talked about it and I brought it up. To me, it's much bigger part of what I'm talking about now, prevention. I was really high on prevention then, and I am now. I felt that everything that I was talking about was not only good for kids in trouble, but all young people trying to make their mark, believe it or not, or at least most anyway, most who weren't didn't have a sense of diligence or any was ever taught any how to apply meaning and process to their lives. So at that time, prevention was strong for me. Still is actually. Um, Back to the helping professionals though, because I noticed in that podcast I kind of wheeled back into it, and the whole thing was about creating a safety net where the holes were a lot smaller. We weren't losing as many people, and that was always for me. That was always what I wanted to talk about. That was always what I felt was the whole point of this. So I moved to that one too. And I won't tell you what numbers these were, but some of the things that I was talking about in that first podcast. I wanted to talk about a little bit about what I called assisted motivation. I don't talk about that as much anymore, but this all came about for myself in thinking about this. One of the spokes to this wheel I came up with, leverage-based tapered life management, was using motivational practices, not going all out with the motivation, but using some concepts of the motivational theory. I was always beforehand like a lot of people, you know, um, a great listener to some of the great guys, Tony Robinson, Les and all those guys, Bob Proctor, still a great Bob Proctor guy. You know, his work on paradigm changing to me is what we all need to do, and definitely what I'm trying to do is change the paradigm for the young people. But I was always a great lover of those, and not just their content, but delivery, the psychological aspect of it. And I knew who they were working with. They was always working with people who wanted to make more money, and these people had challenges, but nothing like the real challenges that young people who were in trouble and were trying to climb their way back up faced. They had more challenges, more serious challenges. But I thought some of the principles in motivation could be used on them to a much better outcome, and certainly an audience who needed it just as much or more. So that was for me, using those principles and putting those principles down was very big, especially my thought process in that first podcast. So assisted motivation was huge for me. Um, the last thing I talked about was the know, like, and trust factor for myself. Because at that time, that was my first podcast. And, you know, not that I've improved that much, but sometimes at that time, I think I was reading straight off notes. It didn't do too bad, but the know, like, and trust factor. I wanted people to trust what I was saying because I was serious about what I was saying. I was passionate about what I was saying. And to me, it meant a lot. It was how I wanted to create a model, a hybrid model, or a method to help the young people, the families, and the practitioners be a better adhesive group, more directed, more outcome directed, and not separate entities moving in what just appeared on the surface to be the same direction, but not really, you know. So that is a little bit of a post view of that first podcast. Uh, some of the things I still want to talk about now, maybe I talked about them a little differently at that point that I do now. But those are the things that are very important to me. Just getting that group, that crew, more goal oriented, specific goal oriented, and really shooting for not just some type of improvement to get better, but an improvement that knocked it out of the park. I still believe that. I think this is an opportunity. I've said it all the time, and I mean it. This is an opportunity when you're down, and you know you're down, and people are telling you down. this is a great opportunity to get up, because the power you get from getting up is something you could harness and use forever. So I'm going to close this off now and say that if I can help anyone or talk about anyone, always you can see me at parentingyourchildinrecovery.com. I'm also at Second Starts, that's number 2, NDSTARTS.com. And of course, my email, richardjones@secondstarts.com. So to talk to you about anything of that nature, us being able to, work with you and your family, or just give your family a voice. If giving your family advice so that we don't work together, that's fine too. Anything that we can do to help this situation, because that's always been my goal. So remember, as always in closing, let's help somebody get better, help somebody stay better, and most definitely help somebody be better.